Welcome back to the Innovation Brief, the podcast where we have real conversations with leaders driving meaningful change across diverse sectors. I'm Will Benton.
And I'm Hernandez. In each episode, we speak with innovation leaders exploring the ideas, challenges, and breakthroughs shaping a better future.
Today, we're delving into the intersection of business, innovation, and sustainability with a guest whose work is helping redefine how companies respond to the world's biggest challenges. We're joined by Jonatan Pinkse, Professor of Sustainable Business and Director of the Centre for Sustainable Business at King's Business School, King's College London.
Jonathan's research explores how businesses can contribute meaningfully to sustainable development, whether that involves tackling climate change, transforming business models, or navigating the tensions between profit, purpose, and the planet. He's a thought leader in sustainable innovation and a regular voice at both academic and practitioner events.
So if you're curious about how companies can drive real change in the face of complex global issues and how innovation can be both strategic and sustainable, this conversation will give you plenty to think about. Let's dive in. Welcome, Jonatan, and thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself and the work that you do?
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm currently a professor at King's Business School, where I lead the Center for Sustainable Business. And here we try to do research and also more impact work and really trying to, let's say, keep sustainability on the agenda of business. At first it was really getting it on the agenda, but now it's definitely moved a little bit in the space. How can we keep our relevance? Because the underlying problems, of course, are not going away. They're only getting worse. So that is a real challenge. So we really have, as a center, the idea of, okay, how can businesses really make a difference here? So no longer asking the question whether they should or not. We still feel that we've passed that station. But how to do this is not that easy. And that's very much what we do. Mostly via research, because we're academics. And hopefully we will come up with insights that are useful to people.
And what pulled you into this space? And was there a turning point where you thought, this is where I can make a difference?
Yes, but it was quite a long time ago already. So I was trained as an economist, and I was actually, towards the end of my studies, going for investment banking. So I would say a bit different. But then, just by chance, I was asked by a professor who was the father of a friend of mine if I wanted to be helping him with a research project on renewable energy and sustainability. And I started doing that. And that really kind of captured my imagination a lot more. And I thought, hey, this is a topic I never thought about so much. And really, I feel that is maybe a little bit more meaningful. Ironically, maybe then I started writing my master's thesis under the supervision of the former CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, who was actually teaching responsible management then, which is easier for someone who has retired to kind of start doing that. But in that sense, my thinking comes from the fossil fuel industry, but try to see how we needed to change things. And this led for me in the end to me doing my PhD on the topic of business responses to climate change. But I do talk about the year 2002, so it was quite early days. So looking back, my claim to fame is always I was the first PhD on the topic of business and climate change, because the whole topic of climate change was, of course, studied a lot from other perspectives, science, policy, and so forth, but not so much from the management perspective. And ever since then, I've always tried to keep that part of what I do. I go also in different directions, innovation, entrepreneurship, more the AI space I find interesting, but I always try to bring it back to sustainability. And then it's mostly environmental sustainability, but sometimes also social sustainability.
Awesome. We'll talk more about the paradoxes in sustainability in a second, but lots of organizations have claimed or continue to claim that they focus on sustainable innovation, especially at the moment. But what, in your opinion, really is sustainable innovation? But also, more importantly, I would maybe say, what is it not?
It's a very big, big question. When we typically look at innovation, traditionally people look at product and process innovation, and sustainability comes into play with both. It used to be a lot more process innovation. Companies are actually improving energy efficiency, trying to reduce different kinds of emissions, not just carbon emissions. And that was very much what it was. Because of that, it was quite in the background for customers and for the public eye, because you don't really know what is happening inside the companies. A famous company then was 3M. They had, I think, pollution prevention PACE program was one of the first that really showed, see, if you do this, you can make money, because we actually saved a lot. With product innovation, you got a lot more of, okay, now it's going into the products that we buy. And we start thinking about, do I buy a green product or green services and so forth? So it became a lot more consumer facing, also in the business to business market. And then you needed to start sell green more. What that means in terms of a challenge, will people be willing to pay more for that? Do they want to pay a green premium or not? And if not, how do you then sell it maybe in a different way? So a lot of work there started really being about the commercialization of it. How do you really go more towards that outward facing part of green and sustainable innovation, which has become a real challenge. With certain products, it works well and people like green products. But the moment it starts leading to some kind of sacrifice that the functionality of a product would not be the same, the electric car is a typical example of that, then it becomes more problematic. Now we've also gone more in the direction of really what is called business model innovation. That companies are completely reimagining what they are actually doing in terms of their own ways of making money. And that they say, no, it's not just that we have a few products in our lineup that are the green products. No, everything we do breeds sustainability. We think about it all the way and also into our supply chains. And then you really try to do sustainable innovation where you have most impact. What is sustainable innovation not? Basically, a lot of companies really just focus on a few things where they can do great. And yes, it might be a great project, might be a great product, but it is not in any way systemic throughout the organization. It's really just pockets of sustainability. And I don't think you can really argue that you're on a pathway towards sustainable innovation and becoming a more sustainable company, because there is no real way of scaling it up. But that's also very difficult. So I always give my students the task, how would you reimagine this company if it would be purely sustainable? And then they see how difficult it is.
So you've touched on how sustainability often involves these paradoxes where you're having to hold competing demands simultaneously. How do you think this should shape how we think about business innovation right now?
Yeah, so basically the old discussion was always, does it pay to be green? Can we make money with it? And of course, there are famous examples. I already mentioned 3M, where yes, it does work. And that debate was very important to get it on the agenda of business, to see, yes, we can actually do this without having to sacrifice anything. But with some colleagues, we basically came to the conclusion that movement was important and it really put sustainability on the agenda. But it's not always that easy to make, let's say, money in the short term with sustainability initiatives. So the question we started asking was, are companies willing to sacrifice profits for the sake of environmental value, social value, and so forth? And this is where you start seeing the tensions between them. Because I would argue, because sustainability is what we call a kind of umbrella term, it is so many different issues. It's impossible to do something that is kind of ticking all the boxes and it's all beautiful. It's just not very realistic. So there's always some type of trade-off that you need to make. And is that trade-off okay? Or is it going to be really painful? So now a long time ago, we did a workshop with people from business to try and give this message to them. And they didn't respond much. It was a bit like, okay, they don't find this interesting. But then several came afterwards like, oh yes, it's really interesting, but we can't talk about it. We can't talk about doing sustainability while sacrificing profits. That's just not what we can do. Which made us realize, okay, this first step needs to be accepting that there are these tensions. Most of them were just in their organizations denying the fact that there were any tensions. They could only talk about it if it was all beautiful. And we know that it's not like that. So that was actually the first step. And that's very important for sustainable innovation as well. Instead of just looking for the beautiful overlaps and the pockets of where it works, where does it not work? And how can we address those? Because when you start seeing the tensions, you might say, is it really a tension? Is this a true paradox? Because a true paradox is that really you want to do two things and they just can't go together. That's hardly ever the case. It's very often that people think it won't work. They will tell you lots of stories why they're not doing something. It's a personal thing that almost everyone can do really well. We can always explain why we're not changing. So in this case, you say, no, if you start doing it, where are actually the bottlenecks? is it really something you can't overcome? Or once you start doing it, you do a pilot project, you collaborate with some new players, you find out, oh, it's actually not that difficult. We just thought it would be difficult. But sometimes it turns out to be really difficult. And there was a beautiful case recently of Lego trying to explain how they tried to replace oil for their little bricks. And they really quite honest, and they tried different materials and so forth. It just wasn't the same clicking thing what Lego needs to do. And I played a lot with it as a kid. And it's like, yeah, it needs to be perfect. So there you see that they really tried something. It didn't work out. But so far as I understand, they haven't stopped trying to figure it out, and they try different materials and so forth. So this is the important thing of this paradoxical thinking, that by kind of embracing the tensions a little bit more, you start seeing that some things are not a problem and others you can overcome. But it's not always the case, of course. Sometimes it's just really, really difficult.
Yes, especially as things develop and kind of change. Given your kind of time in this space and how long you've been working on the topic, can you give us an example of something that you used to believe about sustainable innovation that you've maybe since changed your mind about? And if you have an example, why the change?
For me, it was very much because my topic of my PhD was business responses to climate change. That was my focus. And I became, like many other people, that became everything. So climate change, what we now call net zero, that was the term we didn't use back in the day, that is everything. So everything was boiled down to, can we reduce carbon emissions? I think that's a real mistake, where I started seeing a lot more like, oh yeah, but that's not the only end game. We also have things about nature, how we're polluting. We don't like plastic pollution, also what it does to animals. That has nothing to do with climate change. If you've ever been in some kind of tropical resort and you're out of season, there you'll see all the plastic everywhere because they've not yet cleaned it up. I remember once being in Malaysia and it's like, why is it so messy here? It's like, oh yeah, you're 1 week too early. Well, we're cleaning up later this week. And that is just something we don't necessarily like for all kinds of reasons, and also just for ourselves that we don't like the look of it. I really started doing more research in the area of biodiversity, finding out how difficult that is. Currently, been working more on the circular economy. And there I really have come to the conclusion that, yes, we want to get to a circular economy, but not just to reduce carbon emissions, also to just use less resources, because mining for new materials is actually with all kinds of negative impacts for people and planet. So I came to the conclusion that there is a lot more to it, but that also makes things a lot more complex, especially for companies. When you talk about nature, biodiversity, it's a real struggle to translate that into something that can be managed within the organization. And I think some companies are really on a journey there and trying, while others think that's just too far away from what we're currently doing.
And looking to the future, what should innovation leaders be preparing for that they're maybe not yet seeing?
That's always very difficult to say, because what you see with innovation is that suddenly things come on your path that you never really realized. The main mistake we make is that we see innovation as a potentially linear trajectory. Like, oh, we've developed this new material that allows us to do this, and then we can go there. It hardly ever goes like that. If we're very honest with ourselves, did we expect 5 years ago to have ChatGPT and what it does? I don't think so. We would all be very skeptical. Like, yeah, we had these things for us for transcription services when we would do interviews, and it was automated and it was all very bad. And suddenly that has gone out of nowhere to really having a huge impact, and more than we can imagine. But because of that, you have a lot of these kind of non-linear effects, that something comes and it just tips the balance in a completely different direction. And that is also in the positive, how people suddenly worry about it. I mean, the Greta Thunberg effect a few years ago, I have never predicted. After being 20 years in this field, maybe I had become a little bit cynical. So when people started saying, oh, now things are really changing, it's like, yeah, I don't think so. And I was really surprised, because the whole story around net zero targets and so forth was embraced a lot more than any kind of other climate target beforehand. Of course, it's now difficult to maintain that, but I would say that's almost normal. Any kind of, when we have a very short concentration time span. So this is the big thing, of course, that it goes a little bit away, but it's not gone. And we keep talking about plastic pollution. We keep keep talking about lots of topics that we didn't really beforehand. So I think, what is the innovation journey going to look like? I don't really know, but I do feel that this whole world of tech, AI, and so forth will definitely change how we think about it, at least inside businesses.
Perfect segue into the next question then, because you touched on it a couple of times already, but so far, and obviously it's changing week by week, but how is AI changing the landscape for sustainable innovation? And what opportunities and or challenges are you seeing this creating for innovation teams, whether corporate or other sectors?
The big challenge, to start with the negative, I'm an academic after all, is of course that we know that the energy consumption goes through the roof when you start using it a lot. And I think Microsoft and Google had to admit that. They were both very much on a very positive trajectory in trying to get to net zero. And then suddenly, with the whole rollout of their AI tools, boom, it just jumped up. I think it was 20% with Google. And this is only the beginning. So the only way we can kind of balance that is to try and see how we can use AI in a very productive way to become more sustainable, to improve energy efficiency, to do all kinds of other things within the field of sustainability. We just don't know exactly what that is, what that will look like, and what results we get out of that. So it's just too early to really know. So I think Bill Gates said a few months ago, it will be big, so don't worry about it. It's like, yes, but people are not necessarily convinced by that. He might be right, and it might be hidden, so we don't always know that. But we, of course, are also using AI for a lot of things that are not very meaningful. Do I do that myself? Of course, as well. There's a version of me as a Ghibli character somewhere that my colleague made. So that is the tricky thing a little bit. We really need to get going and using AI then for sustainability, so we manage in companies to get that balance right. That's my academic question. I don't yet know what the balance will look like, but there is a lot of opportunity there. At the same time, and this is what Microsoft already found out, and that's what they do themselves, they try to sell their tools to whoever. They're not just selling their tools to companies that want to improve their sustainability impacts. So it is also being used to find new oil and gas for oil, and there might be more money in that. And then you see that the whole thing just makes things worse, in this case for carbon emissions. And my fear is that that might happen as well. So there's a huge promise, but we really have to work very hard to deliver on that promise that will not go by itself per se.
I think that kind of touches on something you said at the beginning of, at first it was getting sustainability on the agenda, and now there's this question about keeping it on the agenda. Right now we're in very interesting times. We're seeing lots of shifts geopolitically. There's lots of global economic uncertainty, lots of other changes. How should innovation leaders try, or how can they maintain momentum on sustainability?
As I said, the problems are not going to go away. So there may be certain social issues where you say, well, this was a trend now, people stop worrying about it. So so be it. These, especially the environmental issues here, these problems are only becoming worse. I recently posted something on LinkedIn about a study of farmers in Brazil really struggling to work with the new reality of their crops failing all the time. Then I got responses from people from Costa Rica saying, oh, this is exactly our problem as well. So we can't just say, oh, yeah, no, climate change, that was so 2019. No, these things become worse and worse, and it will affect a lot of companies in their supply chains. So if you look at food and drinks sector, the whole agricultural supply chains are really having major problems. And of course, you can just say, oh, we'll just switch supplier. But there will be a moment that you can't switch supplier because there's nowhere to switch to. Plus, you're then a little bit too reactive, I would say, and in a way, I would feel you have also a moral obligation to help the farmers in your supply chain to cope, instead of just saying, not our problem, we'll go somewhere else. So because of that, a lot of these issues, they will keep coming back. And because of that, they will keep coming in people's minds like, oh, this is important. Even though you now read sometimes that the young people no longer worry about climate change. It's like, yeah, but then you need a few incidents and then they will start worrying about it. But I still don't believe that the scaremongering approach is the best thing. But people have to realize that, well, chocolate is becoming more expensive because the supply chains are actually affected by it. This is why your chocolate is becoming more expensive. And we'll see that more and more. So in a way, it will slightly more automatically stay on the agenda. At the same time, of course, government is not necessarily giving up. And you see, for example, in a country like Australia, where it's always up and down, up and down. Is it coal industry or is it the other side? But it has become a real electoral issue. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. So yes, I know that Trump is not really a fan of doing anything in this space, but there might be new people later on, and then it might change again. Politics is usually 4 or 5 years timelines. For businesses, they need to think decades. You can't just do the 4 or 5 years. So yeah, this is where I'm hopeful that it will stay on the agenda, because I don't think we're solving the problems.
Fingers crossed. And the electorate generally tends to get shouty if they can't afford their chocolate. So yeah, we'll see what happens. It's a nice kind of lead into my next question in terms of your advocacy for cross-sector partnerships and kind of working together from a partnership point of view. Under what circumstances should innovation leaders pursue partnerships, whether that's with kind of the public sector, NGOs, or competitors in the private sector? And how, in your experience, do they prevent large multi-stakeholder initiatives from becoming a drag on the speed of innovation?
The limited research I've done in this field has shown me that it is really difficult. So working together, let's say with NGOs or even government, it all sounds great, but in practice it can be really, really difficult. For simple things of really having different interest in the topic, what is it that you try to achieve, but also different timelines. Because of that, I've definitely spoken to people from business that were highly frustrated by trying to work with NGOs. At the same time, I've spoken to NGOs that were highly frustrated working with businesses. But I've also seen it work really well. So, for example, companies that try to deal with the whole issue around palm oil in Indonesia, for example, to get a real good understanding of how things are on the ground, what the main issues are, how to deal with that. It's very often the NGOs that have much better knowledge and expertise in that field, because they try to work in that space, try to understand it better, and are trusted more as well by the local people. While as a big corporation, you will struggle to basically really get to people and to that level and that understanding. So there it can work. But you have to also realize that any kind of NGO is, of course, always underfunded. They're always looking for more money. So when we really talk about innovation, who really has the knowledge is usually the company. And yes, you can work together with other organizations, but yeah, companies just have deeper pockets, so they very often can develop a lot more and really dig a bit deeper. In terms of working with government, there it depends always so much about why is government there, what is the purpose here, and that it depends on the political situation where you are. Quite often you see that companies are part of some kind of multi-stakeholder partnership, not because they wanted to, but that is the only way to do business in a certain country. You need to partner somehow with the government. I still hope, and I've seen it with work around water conservation and so forth, that really can help to work across these different sectors. But there are also a lot of issues where it might sound great on paper, but in practice, you're basically adding so much complexity to how you run your project that maybe it wasn't the best idea after all, and go it alone might be a better approach. So I definitely would not want to see it as, whatever problem you have in the field of sustainability, let's form a multi-stakeholder partnership, because it's not always necessary.
Thank you. A little bit earlier, you mentioned that some of the work you've done is focusing on, social entrepreneurship. And kind of going back on that partnerships idea, how can, say, larger businesses or their innovation teams learn from or integrate, with these social entrepreneurs without, just co-opting their ideas? And maybe what are the benefits for these organizations to even work with social entrepreneurs in the first place?
Let me start with the benefits. So the key part of social enterprises is that they try to balance the social and the economic from their foundation. That's what they try to do. And that is always the mindset. There are different ways of doing that. Some run a for-profit business and use the profits to then spend on some kind of charity work. Others really combine it in different ways in the different projects that they do. But this mindset of trying to really combine that and how you can bring things together in a productive way is really what social enterprises do on a much smaller scale than what is asked for by many big corporations. The same type of demand is now more and more on bigger corporations as well. They have to also start thinking about how do we balance it all. And they really can learn a lot from how these smaller organizations have been doing this. So I think that is one of the key things that you can get out of social enterprises. And you do see bigger companies that want to become a B Corp, for example, where they really say, no, what our purpose is different. It's no longer about short-term financial earnings. We are here for something bigger. But you then still need to integrate that in everything you do. You can say we're a purposeless business, but what does that mean? So I think we've learned a lot, for example, also from studying social enterprises, how best to do that. Working together with social enterprises would be one way of doing that. But you can sometimes have, indeed, what you said, co-opting. There can be some negative things. We did years ago research where we spoke to some of the smaller organizations that definitely were more socially oriented. And they said, yeah, we work with these bigger corporations. They call it open innovation. We're not so sure if this is open innovation. I think they just want to know what we do. And if it's attractive enough, they'll buy us. To be honest, some of these people were not necessarily against that because it's called an exit strategy. But at the same time, yeah, how much do you open up? Yes or no? I've worked a lot in the field of the electricity markets, and there we've seen that the pioneers with solar energy, wind energy were very often smaller ones, cooperatives and so forth. And they were being bought big time by the bigger utilities. And sometimes really to learn how to do this. And then you could see that the idea of the social enterprise was scaled up to a higher level, but quite often as well, where it basically then was watered down and you got what we call mission drift, that the initial social purpose was no longer there when it became part of the bigger organization. And then, yeah, you sold your shares, so you can't say much about it, basically. That's the thing.
Yes, that's the bed that you've made. Kind of building on this topic, but also based on the research that you've done, do you, and without it kind of asking for a magic silver bullet, do you have an insight that you can share that you think would change how corporate innovation leaders could impact sustainability if they were to implement it?
Oh, that is a very, very difficult thing. As an academic, I've learned more what not to go for than what to do. We very often we learn. So here, where I'm always a bit pessimistic. So my call for companies is very much to look for structural solutions to really change your underlying technology. So for the long term, you're, for example, really just on a structural basis, reduce your energy use, your carbon emissions, and so forth. I see quite a lot of products which ask way too much from their customers. They say, yes, it will work if people change their behavior. Yeah, if they change their behavior. But we know they're not going to change their behavior. If COVID has taught us one thing, life can really change, and some things will change a lot since then. I mean, the whole work from home and how that is still happening, and we kind of in a hybrid mode all the time. Yes, I see a real change. I was also asked back in the day, do you think that everyone keeps being on their bicycle? Being a Dutchman in the UK, it was quite hilarious how suddenly everyone started cycling. It's like, yeah, I think it will be a very good secondhand market in a few years when this is all over. It turns out that most of these companies selling them actually went bankrupt even because of the boom and bust there. Because guess what? That type of how we're moving around, mobility, we don't really change that so much. So with sustainable innovation, yes, behavioral change is important, but don't rely on it too much because it's just not really going to work. This is where automation then comes into play. If a lot of these products do it for you and it's easy, then it's probably going to be much more effective. And then people might be more sustainable in using their products. They just don't realize it. At the same time, it makes us lazy because if everything is done automatically, then you get what is called the rebound effect. And that is what I've learned definitely with any kind of sustainable innovation. Always do your extra thought experiments. what might be unintended consequences. So I see that I switched to an electric car, and since then my kids are, well, you can drive me now because it's no longer bad for the environment. And it's like, yes, it's not how it works. That's a typical rebound effect. It's more efficient, it's easier, we use it more. So in balance, we're actually making things worse. And you will see that in many different areas. So this thinking about the unintended consequences, are they really unintended? Quite often we can anticipate them. And what are you going to do about it? Instead of just go for it, you know it's going to work out in a negative way, but you go for it anyway. It's like, oh, come on, you should have known better. So that little extra thought experiment, don't go straight to, oh, the solution is great.
Thanks for that. What's a shift maybe in tech, policy, or mindset that you think that people are really underestimating right now when it comes to sustainable innovation?
As I said before, I really underestimated the whole net zero movement actually grabbing people's attention. But I think that has run its course now a little bit. People no longer believe it, and they rather see that now as like, is it not actually a form of greenwashing? Yes. Why? Because the shift we see is that people realize that doing sustainability is not just about talking about it and communicating, but it needs big structural change. So what really opened my eyes, I read a book some time ago about how we rely on just a few materials. So if we say, oh, we are going to net zero, we need to get rid of oil and gas. It's like, yeah, that sounds great. Hey, we no longer have coal-fired power plants in this country, in the UK. So it has worked. Yes, but we can't make steel without coal yet. We can't make cement, can't make concrete because of that. We can't build. There's so many parts where we're just so far off what the solution is. So I think people need to start seeing, and this is called embodied emissions, that it's also a lot in the materials that we use for everyday products, houses, cars, and so forth, where we have a lot of impact. You look around, there's nothing net zero about anything around me here. I see plastic, but even a table, everything we need fossil fuels for almost everything. So only when we really figure out how to also get rid of that in the materials, then we will maybe get there more. But that is a long way to go. So my main message is always just the fact that you've basically greened your energy system doesn't mean you're there already. Yes, electricity is very important, but it's only part of the equation, not the full equation. And even then, there, it turns out to be really difficult because, of course, we see now solar and wind everywhere, but it really struggles getting more money in it. Why? Because the profitability levels are not the same as with oil and gas. So this is why you see BP and Shell always going up and down a little bit, because they just can make more money still with the good old oil and gas than they can with the renewables.
Building on this in terms of thoughts or advice, do you have a potentially unorthodox piece of advice you would give to innovation leaders trying to drive sustainable innovation within their organizations?
I don't know when it's unorthodox, but I've learned from this whole work on paradox and so forth, the tensions there is very much the try a little bit harder. Don't immediately dismiss that it cannot be done. I think sometimes we're also a bit too tech focused, and then I'm really contradicting myself now. But technology is very important. But the fact that you have the technology doesn't mean it's going to be successful. And I think this is where many companies make a mistake. How often can you not read anywhere on the web that there is this new technology and it's going to save us all? And then you never hear anything about it. And that's because doing innovation is not just about the invention part, it's also about the commercialization part. And I think everyone knows it, but it still seems to be going wrong so often. So it's not unorthodox at all, but really look at, is there a market? If not, can I create a market? Is that in any way reasonable to expect? And so forth. Because there are just too many ideas that I would think like, I don't want to be the one that told you so, but this is just not going to work. And of course, we love to talk about the fact that doing sustainability is a systems transformation. We need to change everything. And that's exactly the problem as well, because no one wants to have a systems transformation per se. And this is where, especially net zero and climate change is so difficult, because changing electricity suppliers, we can manage that. Changing a car, well, it's a bit more difficult. I see many people that have some doubts. Oh, by the way, you have to become vegan. You can't go on holidays anymore. You start hating life. And this is why you see that there's so much resistance against it. So for me, the main idea is always go back to your customer. What is your customer looking for in your product or your innovation? And don't feel that the sustainability part of it is the most important. It is part of what we call a bigger bundle of different benefits that you try to get out of a product. And it might well be that the sustainability component is something you actually hide in your communication, but it's still there, but you actually emphasize something else. And I know it's very unpopular to talk about Tesla, but this is the one thing actually that Elon Musk did well. I would say that the Tesla wasn't really sold like this green car. It was more this fancy car, and especially the acceleration was the first wow. Then the autonomous driving was the second wow. Because of that, people wanted to have it. It became an aspirational good. Of course, we now find ourselves in a different time that now people want to get rid of them. On the other hand, you can probably buy them more cheaply now. But let's not go into to that debate.
Is there a quote or idea or insight that you keep coming back to in your work that helps you to navigate the complexity or resistance that you have in your field?
So I don't do quotes because my mind never keeps things long enough in my head. I just forget everything. Don't ask me what I ate yesterday. I wouldn't be able to tell you either. But there's definitely an idea. The idea was a book I read by Michael Mann. He's one of the most important climate scientists out there. And it goes back into what I said before. He basically says the root of talking about personal responsibility of people is very dangerous as a route. And he shows in his book that big business actually has actively tried to push for that because it basically shifts the attention away from what big corporations could be / should be doing. So yes, I understand the idea that people need to feel responsible for doing their part. But this whole blame game, if you don't do that enough, that you're a bad person, is actually completely counterproductive. And this is what he shows and argues well, I think, in the book, where then everything around net zero, as I said already, becomes negative. And then you see actually the backlash, which we're currently experiencing, that people don't want this. They don't see it so much. So that most solutions are actually about big structural changes in such industries as energy, the way we build our houses, the way we move around, and so forth. But in certain fields, that's just going to be very difficult. We're so used to flying everywhere. There is no form of low carbon flying. We can't electrify that. You just won't get very far. Hydrogen, very long off. We don't really know. So it's just not clear what the solution will be. And then it means sacrificing certain things. But anyway, don't blame people. Don't blame the individuals so much. In the end, most of us are just normal people trying to lead a normal life. That doesn't make us bad all the time.
Well, what a note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today. To wrap, what's next for you and how can our listeners learn more about your work and connect with you if possible?
Well, to connect, I have a unique name. So if you look up my name on the internet, you can connect to me on LinkedIn and it will always be me because I'm the only one on planet Earth with this funny name. So that helps. I'm very much in the different routes, what we discussed already. My future research is going to move a lot in the connection between AI and sustainability, where we try to figure out what AI can do in terms of positive things, while knowing that there might be some negative aspects. Another topic that I keep pushing for is that we need to adapt more to the impacts of climate change. This idea that we can prevent all impacts from happening, we're beyond that point. And instead of living in denial, I think that companies should think a lot more about how they can improve resilience, not just of their own business, but also of the communities with which they interact and which they are based. And that also means in the supply chain. So as I said, that you take responsibility for your suppliers instead of leaving them behind because of the impacts of climate change. Those are the two main things that I'm currently focusing on, although I do always too many things. So I do lots of other things on the side, but this is my current focus, I would say.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll definitely put your social links and so on in the description so that everyone can find them and so they can connect with you. And we'll be keeping an eye out for your work. Thank you so much again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And I guess that's a wrap on our second episode of the Innovation Brief. Thank you so much again, Jonatan Pinkse, for being with us and sharing your wealth of experience on driving sustainable innovation.
So if you've enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to Innovation Brief and don't forget to leave us a review. It'll help other innovation enthusiasts discover the show.
We'll be back next time with another great conversation. Thank you and bye.